My name is Malik Daniel.
Hi, my name is Keenan Smith.
My name is Miguel. Welcome to Power Story.
Season 3.
A podcast from Ray Graham Training Center High School in Chicago.
This season, our thing is stand up for what you believe. Social justice change make a difference.
The Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence is the oldest and largest statewide organization in the U.S. working to prevent the devastation caused by firearms.
And thank you for your lovely day and have a safe one.
My name is Keenan Smith, and I am here with Miguel Morales and Dion McGill from the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence.
Dion, thank you for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
What is your role with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence?
So with the ICHV, I'm the program manager. So I run the education programs. So basically, I go into schools, just like today. I go into schools all around Chicago and sometimes other places in the state and work with kids, just dealing with gun violence and issues surrounding gun violence, usually focusing on action and what we can do to prevent gun violence.
What is the mission of the council?
So the ICHV is the oldest and largest statewide organization that works to prevent death from gun violence. Like, that's a broad topic. There's a lot that goes into that, but we kind of do all of that. We do legislation. We work with community groups. We work with survivors of gun violence and victims of gun violence. And then we also do education. So we always tell people that we do a top-down and a bottom-up approach to gun violence.
Why did you get involved in this kind of advocacy work?
Well, I was born and raised in Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, and I grew up in Roseland, so the far south side. And if you're familiar with Roseland, the nickname of Roseland is the Wild Hunnets. So, I kind of grew up with gun violence happening. I was shielded more than a lot of my peers were because my mother was like, you can't go outside. So, but growing up with that and then becoming a school teacher, so I taught in CPS, and I had a lot of students who were victims of gun violence, and I would see it a lot around the school that I taught at. So it just kind of was like something I was very in tune to. So when I saw the job for the ICHV come up, I was really hoping to step away from teaching for a little bit. So I was like, oh, that's perfect for me. And so, I love Chicago. I care about it. And so this job is a perfect fit for someone like me. And I love activism. I love making stuff happen and sometimes shaking your fist, and talking with people. So I could do all of that.
What is your personal really about guns and people be able to own them and with what rules?
Oh man, that's a tough question because I'm a veteran. So I spent 9 years in the Army, and I use a lot of guns. I was in Afghanistan for a year. So, the reality of war is you use guns to shoot at people and you get shot at. And I've kind of, experienced that in that way. And personally, it's one of those things, I can't even imagine a world or living in a country with no guns. Like, to me, it's like one of those things I like to say, I don't think we should even have guns, but it's so weird to even, say. I'm like, okay, that's not even possible. But I lived in Germany, and actually when I lived in Germany, civilians couldn't have guns. If you lived in Germany and you had a gun, you were a police officer or a security guard. And it's one of those things because gun violence, you said to somebody, someone's gonna get shot today. They'd be like, are you crazy? No one's gonna get shot today, like not here. And so I think people can have guns, but I think everyone, to have one, you have to have background checks. I like some countries now, they make you prove why you need a gun. Like, why do you need this? And that's not a bad idea. Like, why do you need a gun? Like, self-defense. And they're like, that's not good enough. You need, you have to give us a better reason because we have police for that. Which here is it, we have some issues with the police here. So that's a issue too. But I think some people can have guns, can be responsible, but I think you need to do at least as much as you need to get a license for a car, right? You got to take a test. You got to do a driving test. You have to do, regular tests, so on and so forth. And with a gun, you just get I have my FOID card. I have a license on a gun, and I did the whole thing on my phone, and it cost $10. So I didn't have to prove anything. I just, had to prove I wasn't a felon. That's it. And I get a gun, so that's a little weird to me. So I think there needs to be more rules than that.
Why does Chicago have a bigger problem with guns violence than other cities?
You know, I hear that question a lot, and it's funny. I went to college to be a history teacher. If you're familiar with the history of Chicago, the reason Chicago exists is because it was easy to travel to, right? First, people were traveling here on boats, and you had all the rivers, so you could get here, right? And you have you hear about DuSable having that trading post right on the river, so it was a great way to get to it. Then when we started building roads, it was still a great place to get to, right? Well, trains first. So your trains came here, and we had the stockyards and all the pigs and the cows. Then you had roads. It was an easy place to get to. Then planes. And before the war, O'Hare Airport was the busiest airport in the United States of America. So Chicago has always been a great place to get to. Easy, and it's so big. You can come here. You could be an anonymous. So why do we have such a big drug problem? Because you can come from Mexico, you can come from Canada, New York, and Los Angeles, bring all your drugs here, sell them, and get out. And same thing with guns, so most of the guns in Chicago actually come from other places, 60% of them. So they come from Indiana, which is huge, Mississippi. Some guns come from Alaska, Arkansas, Louisiana, mostly places with really loose gun laws. But Chicago has such a problem because we're perfect. It's a perfect place to come and, sell whatever, sell it, get out before anyone notices you're here, and come back and do it again. So I think that's what contributes to us having such a big problem. Big part of the guns in Chicago is trafficking, people selling guns and buying them and selling them and buying them and selling them, and this is a perfect place for it. Whereas New York is very isolated because it's way over there, LA is isolated because it's way over there, and here we're just in the middle of everything. So it's unfortunate.
What does racism have to do with guns, death, and injuries in Illinois?
Ooh, that's a good one. Usually in my mind, when I hear guns and racism, the first thing that pops up in my brain is kind of the police violence we see, especially here in Chicago. To me, violence is a byproduct of it's because something else is wrong. I don't have money to feed myself or money to pay my bills, so I'm gonna try to get money another way, whether that's selling drugs, whether that's robbing people, whether that's selling guns to make money so I can buy food or pay bills. Violence to me is always a byproduct of any of that stuff. And here in Chicago, we have such a long history with race relations and racism that now, you can almost you could talk about rich and poor, but when you talk about rich and poor in Chicago, you're still talking about black and white, right? Usually you go far north, a majority of the far north side is more money, it's more white people, right? You go far south side, it's poor communities, mostly black people. And I think, that's kind of how race kind of plays into that, because gun violence happens in poor communities, more impoverished communities that have less education. And because of that, it becomes, especially here, a black and white issue in a lot of ways. And it's really tough because on top of that, you have the police issue. And that's like almost a totally different conversation, but it's real. The police for years have done bad things intentionally to people on the south and west side of the city. And now that we know that, now that's been proven, now that's coming out, that also plays a part in it, because we see these shootings of police with, relatively people who, you're like, well, the person had no gun, the person was in their backyard, the person was in their car, and they were shot and killed suddenly. And that kind of adds to it. So race does have a part in it, but I think all of it is still it's like a side product of other issues that are wrong. And so I think it plays into it in that way.
Are there more male or females victims of gun violence?
Oh, absolutely. Here in Chicago, I think it's between 80 and 86% of the gun violence victims are male. Way more guys than girls get shot and killed in Chicago. And then when you're talking about sexism and gun violence, a big part we don't really talk about is how guns play into domestic abuse. Like if you have a husband who's abusive, when he has a gun in the house, that gets really, because now he has this weapon that he's constantly threatening, can be threatening his wife with. And we actually see that happen a lot. Or women who are in abusive relationships will often later on recount that, my husband, because he had guns or he was a gun enthusiast or what have you, he used that because he'd tell me, you tell somebody about this, I'm gonna shoot you. Or he would use that gun to threaten his wife. And we see that a lot. So sexism definitely plays a part in it. And why more men than women are victims kind of every day, I kind of assume it's the activity that's dealing with the gangs and gang violence. I think more young men kind of play into the gang violence than women. But I'm sure that there's something that plays into that as well, whether it's how we approach boys versus girls in education or what have you. Because, you don't see big gangs of women running through the city. Like, we just don't. But you see gangs of guys all the time. And it's, why, I don't know. But, yeah.
In a perfect world, what would you do to find a solution for these problems?
That's a tough question. You know what? Here in Chicago, I was focused on Chicago because if you can fix the gun problem here, you can fix it anywhere because we are a perfect place for a lot of the stuff that happens. It happens. I would definitely more investment in communities that are impoverished. Like I do a lot of work in Inglewood. I try to do a lot of work in Austin. I volunteer a lot in Austin. Just looking at the schools there, those schools are neglected. They don't have the resources that, schools on the north side and other sides of the city have. And people don't really believe that. But, you can go to a classroom and find broken chairs and the ceilings kind of caving in. I'm like, what? I wouldn't want to come here, so why does any kid want to come here? Whereas you go to a school like Jones, I don't know if any of you guys ever been to Jones, that's like a college campus. It's beautiful in there, right? It's amazing. And you're like, whoa, somebody spent a lot of money, So to me, that's one of the things, all the schools in the city deserve that kind of treatment, Going on beyond that, we know that policing in the city is different from north to south. And that's a conversation that needs to be had publicly. It's never really had. People go, yeah, that happens, and that's a conversation that needs to happen. But more investment in schools, more investment in health facilities. Inglewood just had one health facility open up and everyone's super excited. It needs like 4 or 5 more, because all the different issues, whether substance abuse, we need to invest more in that. Mental health, we need to invest more than that. Job training, we need to invest more in that. People who dropped out of school who now need a GED, we need to invest more in that. See how much investment we need? I feel like it's just like, but if you have people who don't have those things, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you don't finish high school and, you have a felony and you have tattoos all over? So now nobody wants to hire you, so we need investment in all those things. Cause I always joke with my students, like, why don't you see doctors and lawyers gangbang? And they kind of laugh because they don't need to. And I'm like, why not? They're like, cause they have a nice job. You see how you just made it very simple? Because I have a nice job, I'm not out in the corner, right, banging for a corner or selling drugs. So that means we need more nice jobs in this community. And, I hear that from kids your ages all the time. We need more jobs, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of investment. We know we have systemic problems. We need to deal with those. And a big part is also people need to get more involved. Voting is a huge thing that a lot of people don't do. And I feel like a lot of these problems could be dealt with if more people just was like, you as an elected official, whoever the elected official may be, aren't doing your job properly. We're going to find somebody who does. Goodbye. That's simple, relatively simple. And that's something else that needs to happen. And I think if you did all those things, gun violence would start to decrease. Can you eliminate all gun violence? No, there's always going to be people, outliers, or people who get very angry, who, you just can't precipitate. You can't tell that they're going to get that angry and do something they shouldn't do. But you can get rid of a lot of it because a lot of it is, gang members, drugs, interpersonal conflicts that either relate to those two things. So we can deal with that,
What can one person do?
Oh, absolutely. So what can one person do? I'll give you a perfect example. I met a group of kids in Danville, Illinois. It's 2 hours south of Chicago. Relatively small kind of country, rural, I won't say country, rural town. And I went down there for a couple days and there were a couple young people there. One in particular, I'm thinking about a kid named Jacob, but his brother and a group of other kids, about 15 kids as a group. And, with them, they were, if you remember the March for Our Lives march that happened not too long ago, in Danville, they organized that. They did the planning, they got the speakers, they set the schedule, they had an adult get them the permit, but they created everything, they planned everything. After that, they did a town hall meeting, and these young people were getting the adults involved and pulling in people. One person can get other people excited because you just want to, it's like getting a squad together. Like we always talk about, my squad, my team. One person can build a big team by pulling people in. And once you have a big team, now you're not really one person anymore. You're 100 people, 200 people. And, that's kind of what one person can do. One person can build up a coalition or a group that can then do a lot. One person has to spark those things. All the people we think about in history, Martin Luther King was one person, right? But we talk about him constantly, right? Why? Because he was one person who got tons of other people involved with his words, with his actions, with his daring personality. And so one person can change everything like he did, But you have to be daring, Sometimes you got to be a little outlandish and you have to be adventurous. But one person can do so much. And I see it here in Chicago too, especially parents who've lost children to gun violence. Some of these moms and dads are just one-man gangs to themselves, like creating and changing lives and talking to politicians and, doing all those things to create change. So yeah, one person can do tons.
Why do you think there are more and more school shootings happening in the U.S.?
I thought about that a lot. I think part of it is possibly what, the copycat thing. I'm in a bad place for whatever reason, and I've seen other people who were in a bad place do this. And as a result, and the sad part is, like, you look at the Parkland shooting, I know the name of the shooter. I couldn't name one victim for you. Honestly, I just can't. There was, 17 victims? I couldn't name one of them. I can name him, though. And that's quick and easy. And I think there's a part of that to what the media plays, because you hear his name constantly. And so some young kid in another place who's in a bad way mentally or physically, and he's just like, you know what, I can't take this anymore. And I have access to weapons, which is a part of it. I can go and do this, and people are going to know who I am, and people are going to be afraid of me, and I'm going to be important, because ultimately you do end up being those things. When I was a kid, the first big school shooting was Columbine. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. I remember those names. I couldn't tell you one victim from Columbine. I remember the names of the shooters. I actually know a woman who lost a friend in the Columbine shooting. I can't remember that person's name. So, part of it is the copycat thing. And part of it is the stress that young people, you guys deal with a lot. You deal with way more than I dealt with when I was your age. Social media, success, this constant push to college, all this stuff is stressful. And, when you get stressed, you do bad things, and some mistakes are little, some mistakes are huge, but they're mistakes all the same. And, young people, some of you just break. I hate to say it like that, but, you have a kid and getting bullied, all the different things that are added on, and suddenly this kid breaks mentally, just breaks. And what happens when that kid breaks? The kid goes home and he's like, well, you know what? I want people to feel like I feel, or I want to end this. And why end it here in my room by myself when I can end it at the school and take some of these people with me? And that's sad and it's scary, but it happened. I just think kids today are under a lot of pressure. And unfortunately, some of them break. And if you can easily access a weapon, that's kind of the route that some kids take, unfortunately. And some of those end up being violent and some don't. Whereas youth suicides are increased as well. You see those a lot, actually. We don't see them in the news, but so I think that's a part of that issue for sure.
How can we stop this from happening?
Whew, man. I think if you ask, if you ask 50 people, you get 50 different kind of answers. The approach that the ICHV takes, we just want to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. If you couldn't pass a background check, if you couldn't buy from a store, we want to eliminate the possibility of you getting a gun. So if you can't go to the store and get one legally, you shouldn't have one. We don't want you to get one. And I think, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. As we know, Chicago police last year confiscated over 7,000 guns off the streets. It's only 365 days in a year. So, a lot of us say the Chicago police don't do their jobs, but they're out there working, because 7,000 guns are a lot. And some of those were AK-47s and Uzis, MAC-10s, like, high-powered weapons. Yeah. So, you're talking about major stuff out here on our streets, and so we want to try to eliminate a lot of those guns, because those guns all came from people who shouldn't have had them. So if we can eliminate that, we can eliminate a lot of the gun violence we see. Plus the school shootings we see, I think a lot of times part of that is just parents being more careful with their guns. In these situations, a lot of these guns are legally owned, legally purchased, owned in a home. But if you have your guns just kind of laying around and, your 12-year-old kid can get his hands on one, guess what? Your 12-year-old, if he wants to access it, he's going to grab it and walk out the house. And that's no good. And then in this most recent shooting, like the Parkland shooting, he bought his own guns. So that's a discussion to have too. Should teenagers, 18 even, be able to purchase their own guns? That's not an answer for me to have, but it's a discussion to have. Do you guys trust each other that much? Would you trust your 18-year-old next door neighbor to have a gun? Or your classmates? You guys are all in that teenage range. You trust each other to have guns? I don't know. So that's a discussion to have, And I think if you can kind of eliminate those things, we'll eliminate a lot of stuff we see.
What are some ways we can make our schools safer?
Oh, you know what? That's a good question. One of the schools that I partnered with in the past and I actually met with recently, their students, especially after the Parkland shooting, got really involved and really concerned about school safety. One thing they did was the students and the administration kind of got together and talked. And they were talking about, like, where are the soft points of the school. And at that school particularly, for example, they had a back door that people would let people in all the time. Like it was like known, you go to the back door, you knock on it, someone will open it up for you. Whether it was a teacher going out to get lunch, whether it was a student who went out to their car or came into school late. And the kids were like, that's not good. Even the kids told that to their principal. And the principal was like, you know what, you're right. So they added a camera to the door and a buzzer. So instead of people opening, now it's just another entrance that the security can go to or can look on the camera and see if that person come in, things like that. And, depending on the size of the school, having a tight community, there's some value to that. Whereas, in the school, who's in the school, you all know each other. And so when someone's in here who shouldn't be, you all recognize that. And if it's school small enough for that, that's one thing. And if it's not, because some schools have 3,000-4,000 kids, just having those security protocols that the students and the administration can kind of say, yeah, this makes us feel safe. If having a security guard in school makes you feel safe, you should have a security guard. If having a security guard in school does not make you feel safer, then you shouldn't. Metal detectors, I know that's always a discussion. So, it's very hard from place to place, school to school, to kind of say what will make you 100% safe. But as a community, you guys know what makes you feel safer and what doesn't, and you guys need to have that discussion for sure. And just between the students and the administration, because the students know. I was at a school once where drugs were coming in through a basement window, and the students all knew it, but the administration didn't. So when they found out, they just added a gate to the window and the drugs were gone. It was just like that quick. One window was the access point for everything. And so, you guys have to work together to make yourselves all safer. Because if someone slides a gun through that basement window, we got a problem on our hands. So as students, you want to protect yourself. It's always about me. I always tell people that. I'm selfish. It's always about me seeing tomorrow, living, right? So if you live because I'm living, then cool, you just got a benefit of what I do. But it's always about me. So, be about you so that you can see tomorrow and everyone else around you benefits from it.
Power Your Story podcast is produced by students at Ray Grant Training Center High School in Chicago.
With production support from At the School Matters and the Creative Impostor Studios.
Today's episode is produced by
Miguel Morales.
Keenan Smith. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Radio, Google Play Music, and the web at poweryourstorypodcast.com.
We are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as Power Your Story Podcast.
Follow us, subscribe, leave a review or comment, and share our show with a friend.
Thank you for listening to Power Your Story Podcast, and have a wonderful day.
Turn up all the way. I got all the vibes. They don't know.